Wow, this week you've given us a lot to think about. Uh, a real cross-section of what's happening in the federal workforce, huh? I mean, we're seeing these changes reported across so many agencies. It's incredible. The Department of Education, TSA. I mean, it's a lot to process.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a lot. And, when you look at it, just the sheer volume, right? I mean, the number of agencies that are involved, it feels like a period of like really fundamental shifts,
Right.
happening within the government. And our goal in this deep dive is like to move beyond just reporting these events, right? Like, okay, this happened here, this happened there. We're trying to get at like, okay, what does it all mean? What's the big picture? What is the scope of all these reported workforce changes? And what could the lasting impact be? How is the government going to work after all of this?
Well, and the thing that I keep coming back to, this headline from the Forbes piece, the fact that a federal judge has actually ordered the reinstatement of like tens of thousands of fired employees. I mean, that's a big deal. That suggests to me that maybe the administration's plans might not be going as smoothly as they hoped.
Oh, absolutely. That legal challenge is really a central tension in this whole story. So you've got the administration, right? They're moving forward, and reportedly the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, and Elon Musk are involved, and their stated aim is cutting government waste.
Yeah.
They want to get rid of what they say is waste, and they're making all these personnel changes to try and do that. But at the same time, you have this legal pushback,
Right.
which indicates that the way they're going about it, the methods that they're using, are under scrutiny, and that could have real consequences.
Yeah.
Like, can they actually implement their plans?
Right. Right. So let's unpack some of this. I mean, there are a lot of agencies involved, right?
Yeah.
The Department of Education. What's happening there?
Yeah, so what's been reported is that they're planning to lay off like half of their workforce. That's around 2,000 employees. And we've also seen reports of temporary office closures, DC and the regional offices. The context here from what's been reported is that the Trump administration, like they want eventually, they're talking about maybe shutting down the agency completely.
Oh, right.
Right? Calling it an example of bureaucratic bloat. And, it's important to remember that this isn't new, right? Like this has been going on. There are early reports about them laying off probationary employees within the department. So this seems to be part of like a larger thing, a bigger trend that's been going on.
Yeah, yeah. So a massive restructuring potentially, which could really change how federal education policy is developed and implemented, right? What about NOAA? I mean, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I mean, that seems particularly concerning when you think about what they actually do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So with NOAA, what's coming out is that they're preparing for a second round of layoffs, and this could impact like over 1,000 employees. That's about 10% of their total staff. And what makes this really stand out is the timing. This is potentially happening right before a hurricane season. And when you think about it, like we all rely on weather forecasts, right? And if there are fewer people at NOAA, I mean, what does that mean for those forecasts? How timely are they going to be? How accurate are they going to be? And that has a real impact on safety, right? Like if a hurricane's coming, you want to know and you want to know accurately, how bad it's going to be. So that's a big concern.
Absolutely, absolutely. Accurate weather information it's vital, right? Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. The CIA, a very different kind of agency. What have we heard about what's happening there?
Well, the reports are saying that the CIA has also been, firing people, specifically some probationary employees. And this comes after reports of, earlier dismissals of diversity staffers. And that happened after the administration, really focused on eliminating DEI initiatives, right? So that seems to be part of that trend. But what's really interesting here is that there was a ruling back in February that reportedly gave the CIA director more authority to fire officers, like at will. And that raises a really interesting question, right? Like how does that play into all this? I mean, you've got these probationary firings, right? You've got the legal challenges that are happening all across the government. Does this mean that the intelligence community is like on different legal ground when it comes to personnel decisions? I think that's something to really watch.
Definitely adds another layer to think about, yeah. Let's talk about the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs. This seems like a really massive plan, potentially.
Yeah, it really is. So there's an internal memo that was reported on, and it says that the VA they're planning to cut over 80,000 workers. 80,000. And they're planning to start doing this in June. And their stated goal is to get back to the staffing levels that they had in 2019. I mean, when you think about it, that's a massive reduction, right? I mean, these are the people who are responsible for providing care of veterans, for providing services to veterans, and to cut that many people. I mean, it just makes you wonder, how are they going to be able to keep up, with the needs of all the veterans who depend on them? And this also comes after, earlier reports that they dismissed about 2,400 probationary employees back in February. And if you remember, those VA probationary employees, they were specifically included in that judge's order for reinstatement. So, you can really see how these legal obstacles are going to come into play as they try to make these large-scale changes.
Yeah. 80,000. I mean, it's just it's hard to even fathom. It really makes you think about the impact on the veterans themselves, Okay, so let's move on to another agency that touches a lot of people's lives, the IRS. What's the story there?
So the IRS, they're reportedly looking at a pretty significant workforce reduction. I mean, they're talking about cutting their staff by about 50%. 50%. And they're planning to do that through a combination of layoffs and buyouts. And the reports say that they're aiming for a 20% reduction by May 15th. And this all follows earlier reports of like 7,000 IRS workers being laid off, and even the potential closing of over 110 offices, even during tax season. So when you think about it from your perspective, from the perspective of a taxpayer, I mean, what does this mean?
Right.
I mean, does this mean longer wait times if you need help from the IRS? Does it mean delays in getting your tax return processed? I mean, does it mean that they're going to have like less ability to do things like audits or enforce tax laws? I mean, these are all things that could have a real impact on people, on businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are things that we all deal with, right? I mean, every year, it's something that touches everybody's lives.
Yeah.
What about USAID? I mean, the reports there seem particularly quick and far-reaching. Like, is it really happening that fast?
Well, yeah, it does seem to be moving very quickly. The U.S. Agency for International Development, we've seen reports of employees being given very little notice to leave their offices, right, to clear out their spaces. And there's a report that they've either fired or placed on leave 5,600 workers. And Secretary of State Rubio, he's been quoted as saying that 83% of USAID's programs are being shut down. I mean, that's a huge number.
Yeah.
And it really makes you think like, okay, is this a really fundamental shift in how the U.S. approaches foreign aid? I mean, these programs, they oversee global development, humanitarian assistance, all these really important things. So to see cuts of that magnitude, I mean, it's a big deal. It's something to really pay attention to.
It really does. 83%. I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around it, Okay. Let's look at the Social Security Administration. What's going on there? Because I feel like there's some conflicting information. Like, I've seen different numbers, and it's a little hard to follow.
Yeah, no, you're right. There are some conflicting reports, but a number of reports, they do indicate a planned staff reduction. They're talking about around 7,000 employees. So that's about 12% of their workforce. But then there was also this report, and it came from an unnamed source, and it was suggesting much larger cuts. I mean, they were talking about as high as 50%. 50%. But the Social Security Administration, they came out publicly and they said that was not true. They called it false. They called it a rumor. And I think this really shows you how much uncertainty there is, right? And how easy it is for misinformation to spread during these times. I mean, when you have an organization going through big changes like this, it's hard to know what to believe sometimes. You really have to check your sources, make sure that you're getting information from multiple places.
Yeah, absolutely. It does make it hard to get a clear picture. You know? So what about the Labor Department? What's going on over there? Because the cuts there, they seem very specific.
Yeah. So the reports are saying that the Labor Department is planning to reduce staff in one particular office, and that's the office that handles equal employment opportunity laws. And they're talking about a 90% reduction. 9%. I mean, that's almost everybody, right? And we don't know exactly how many people work in that office, but a cut like that, I mean, it makes you think about, what's the impact going to be, right? I mean, you're talking about enforcing anti-discrimination laws, right? Overseeing those laws. And if you have that kind of a reduction in staff, I mean, how are they going to handle complaints? How are they going to conduct investigations? So it's a very specific cut,
Yeah.
but it could have really, really wide-ranging consequences.
Yeah, yeah, it's concerning to say the least. So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, I know there were some initial reports that came out, but then there were also some clarifications. So it's important to make sure we're getting the full story there, right?
Right, exactly. So initially the reports were saying that the EPA administrator Zeldin, that he wanted a 65% staff cut, 65%. But then the White House, they came out and they clarified that. They said no, what he was actually talking about was a potential 65% cut in spending. So not personnel, right? Like the money that they're spending. And of course, I mean, if you cut spending, that could lead to staff reductions, right? But it's not the same as saying, okay, we're going to get rid of 65% of our workforce. So it's really important to get that right. I mean, it's a big difference. And it just shows you how easy it is to get things mixed up, especially during times like these when there's so much information flying around.
Right. It's important to be precise with language like that. It really does make a big difference. Okay, what about the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA? What's happening there?
So NHTSA, they reported a layoff of 4% of their staff. But what's interesting is that they explained that this actually came after a period of growth. So during the previous administration, their staff grew by 30%. So they were hiring a lot of people, and they also emphasized that when they made these cuts, that they made sure to keep the positions that were, quote, critical to the mission of saving lives, end quote. So it seems like, they were trying to be more targeted, right? They weren't just, cutting everybody. They were trying to get staffing levels back down to where they were before all that growth happened. But at the same time, they were trying to make sure that they were still able to do their main job, which is keeping people safe on the roads.
Right. Now that makes sense. So the context about the previous growth, I mean, that's really important, right? To understanding what's happening now. What about FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency? It seems like they're facing a directive that's very, very specifically focused.
Yeah, that's right. So reportedly FEMA has directed their senior officials in the resilience office to basically identify employees who are working on climate, environmental justice, equity, and DEIA initiatives. And the idea is that they are identifying them potentially for firing. And the email that was cited in these reports, it suggests that this directive could actually impact like most of the staff in that office. And it's interesting, Ro, because if you think back, I mean, Trump, he's talked in the past about potentially eliminating FEMA altogether, right? So that history is there, and now DOGE is reviewing FEMA operations. So you can kind of see how all these things might be connected. But what it really highlights is that there's a very specific set of priorities at play here, right? That are influencing these personnel decisions within FEMA.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So what about the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration? I mean, we hear about airport security all the time, right? I mean, that's something that we're all familiar with.
Yeah, so the TSA, they reported firing over 240 employees back in February, and their stated reason was performance and conduct issues, and this was specifically during their probationary period, right? So these were newer employees, and the reports indicate that it's not actually that unusual for probationary TSA workers to be terminated. I mean, this kind of thing happens, and actually, if you look at the data from the Office of Personnel Management, it generally shows that it's less complicated, right? Legally, I mean, to terminate federal staff during that initial period, during that probationary periods. So it's possible that this is just, business as usual, right? For a large agency like the TSA. I mean, 240 people, it sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, maybe it's not.
Yeah. It's hard to know for sure without more context, right? Okay, so the Department of Housing and Urban Development, specifically the Office of Community Planning and Development, what about them? I mean, the reported cuts there are pretty dramatic, I think.
Yeah, they are. So the New York Times, they reported that the Trump administration, they're aiming to cut staff in that office, the Office of Community Planning and Development, from 936 down to 150. So that's an 84% reduction. 84%. I mean, That's huge. And that would fundamentally change, what that office is able to do. I mean, it would change their capacity, their reach. And in this particular office, it deals with local initiatives, right? Community development programs, really important things. So a cut of that magnitude, I mean, it's likely to have a real impact on the communities that they serve.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a potential restructuring on that scale, I mean, it could really, really affect people's lives.
Yeah.
Okay. The Department of Defense, what's happening there? I mean, it sounds like they've also let go of a lot of probationary employees. Yeah, so the Pentagon, they're reporting that they've laid off about 5,400 probationary workers. So that represents somewhere between 5 and 8% of their civilian staff. And reportedly they did this to comply with DOGE's plan, right?
Right.
For workforce reduction. And they've also implemented a hiring freeze. But it's really important to remember, right, that judge's order for reinstatement, I mean, that applies to these Department of Defense employees too.
Yeah.
So even though they've made these layoffs, it's not clear what the long-term impact's going to be. I mean, they might have to bring some of those people back. Right. So the legal challenges, I mean, they're really a factor across the board, right? It's not just one agency. It's pretty much everywhere. What about the health agencies? So like NIH, CDC, CMS, FDA, what are we hearing about them?
So the reports are saying that around 5,200 probationary employees across NIH and CDC, so the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control, they were targeted for layoffs. And Bloomberg has also reported that there have been layoffs at CMS and FDA as well. So the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services and the Food and Drug Administration. And these agencies, I mean, they're essential, right? They do so much. I mean, research, disease surveillance, they oversee healthcare and pharmaceuticals. I mean, all these things that directly affect public health, right? So to see these kinds of reductions, I mean, it's definitely something to be concerned about.
Yeah. The potential impact there, I mean, it's huge, right? It really affects everybody. What about the Department of Energy? What have we heard about them?
So the Department of Energy, they've reportedly fired up to 2,000 probationary employees, and this is according to anonymous sources. But what's interesting is that some of the staff, particularly those who work on nuclear security, they were reportedly asked to come back. So it seems like even though they were making these cuts, there were certain areas where they were like, okay, wait a minute, maybe we need those people after all. And the other thing is that the remaining fired employees, they're also subject to that judge's reinstatement order. So it's possible that they'll end up having to bring some of those people back too.
Right. It does seem like there's a bit of a back and forth happening in some cases. Okay, the U.S. Forest Service. What have you heard about them?
So the U.S. Forest Service has reportedly fired over 3,400 employees, and again, this is according to sources who are familiar with the firings, and this is a big deal, right? I mean, the foresters, they do so much. I mean, they manage the forests, they respond to wildfires, they do conservation work, and we're facing increasing challenges with climate change, with wildfire seasons getting longer and more intense. So to see them lose that many people, I mean, it's concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. Another agency that really has a direct impact on people's lives and on the environment, right?
Yeah.
What about the Small Business Administration? I feel like there's been some confusion, some mixed messages coming from them.
Yeah, it does seem that way. It sounds like things have been a little chaotic over there. So some of the probationary employees, they reportedly received emails telling them that they were being terminated, right? But then they got another email saying, "Oh no, that was a mistake. Those notices were sent in error." But then a few days later, they got a third email, and that one reportedly confirmed that they were actually being fired. So I mean, you can imagine, right? If you're one of those employees, I mean, that's a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty. You don't know what to believe. And it really makes you wonder, like, okay, how are they managing this process? Why is there so much confusion?
Yeah, that's not a good look. So what about the Office of Personnel Management? I mean, they're the ones who oversee the federal workforce, right? I mean, did they have any layoffs?
So according to a union official, probationary employees at at OPM who didn't take the buyout offer that the Trump administration offered. They were let go back in early February. And it's kind of ironic, right? I mean, OPM, they're the ones who are supposed to be like the experts on federal personnel policies. And here they are, letting go of their own probationary employees. So it's a little strange, but it just goes to show you that, nobody is immune to this, right? It's happening everywhere.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. What about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB? I mean, they've always been a bit of a political football, haven't they?
Yeah, they definitely have. So the union that represents workers at the CFPB, they reported that about 73 of their members were terminated, and there was also this directive that went out, basically telling the agency to stop working, to stop doing anything. But then the union leaders in the Trump administration, they reportedly reached an agreement to prevent any further terminations, and they're doing this while there's litigation going on, right? That's challenging the structure of the agency. So it's a really complicated situation, and it shows you how these workforce changes are often tied up with these bigger legal battles, and with politics.
Right. So the CFPB, I mean, it sounds like their situation is very much up in the air.
Yeah.
It's not clear how it's going to play out. What about the National Nuclear Safety Administration? What are we hearing about them?
So an employee at the National Nuclear Safety Administration, they reported that they were planning to fire about 300 staff members.
Yeah.
And that's out of a total workforce of 1,800. So a pretty significant chunk. But what's interesting is that the reports are saying that now the administration is actually trying to rehire some of those employees. So maybe they realized that those cuts were going to have too big of an impact on their mission, right? I mean, they're dealing with a national security, so it's really important that they have the people that they need to do that job.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right? When you're dealing with something that sensitive, that important. What about the General Services Administration, the GSA? Have we heard anything about them?
Yeah. So the GSA, they manage the federal government's properties and supplies, right? So all the buildings, all the stuff the government needs to function. And they've reportedly had layoffs that affected over 100 people. And these kinds of reductions, I mean, they can have an impact on things like the maintenance of federal buildings, right? Making sure that those buildings are in good shape.
Yeah.
Or the procurement of essential services. I mean, if they don't have enough people, I mean, that could slow things down.
Right. It all has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you cut in one place, and it ends up affecting things somewhere else. So finally, in terms of specific agencies, what about the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA? I mean, that one seems particularly important, right?
Yeah.
Given their role in safety oversight.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the FAA, they reportedly terminated about 400 employees, and this happened back in mid-February. And it was actually shortly after a fatal collision that happened over the Potomac River. And the Department of Transportation, they came out and they said that, that the roles that were critical to safety, that they were protected, right, and that they were mainly targeting probationary employees, but there were reports that some of the people who were laid off, that they were actually in safety specific roles. So that does raise some concerns, right? Especially given the timing, so soon after this accident happened. It makes you wonder, like, okay, what's the impact going to be? If they're cutting people who are responsible for safety, I mean, is that going to make things less safe?
Yeah. No, it's a valid concern. I mean, you don't want to be cutting corners when it comes to safety, right? Okay, so we've talked about all these specific agencies, right? But there's also, I mean, this isn't just random, right? There's a bigger plan here. There's a broader directive. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So reportedly, back on February 26th, a memo went out.
Yeah.
And this memo was directed to leaders across all the federal agencies, and it basically told them that they had to submit plans for reducing their workforces, and they had a deadline. They had to do it by March 13th. So it seems like, all these layoffs that we've been talking about, I mean, this might just be the beginning, right? Like, they were expecting that there would be more widespread reductions across the entire federal government. So this is a top-down push, right? They're saying, okay, everybody, we need to cut people.
Yeah. And we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but a lot of this, I mean, it's being attributed to DOGE and Elon Musk, right? So can you talk a little bit more about their role? Like, what's their involvement here?
Yeah, so most of these staff reductions, they've been attributed to DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, and their goal, their stated goal is to get rid of what they're calling government waste, right? So they're going through and they're saying, okay, this is wasteful, we need to cut this, we need to cut that, and apparently during a cabinet meeting back in early March, Trump he reportedly told the agency heads that ultimately they had the authority, right, over firing decisions. So it wasn't up to Musk, it was up to them. But then he also said that if they didn't make enough cuts, then Musk would step in to make sure that those reductions happen. So it's kind of a weird situation, right? I mean, you've got the government, you've got the private sector, and they're all mixed up in this, and it just raises a lot of questions about, who's really in charge here. What are the lines of authority?
Right, right. It does seem like a very unusual level of involvement from the private sector,
Yeah.
in shaping the federal workforce. So the reports also mentioned, other high-profile firings, right, that have happened during the Trump administration, and these seem to be separate from the mass layoffs of probationary employees. So why is that important to think about? Why is that broader context important?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So we're talking about things like, inspectors general, FEMA officials, the Coast Guard commandant, prosecutors, FBI officials, military officials. I mean, there have been a lot of high-profile people who've been fired, and I think it's important to think about that because it shows you that there's a pattern here, right? It's not just about these probationary employees.